is Aurora, and I'm going to be speaking about reality and various different forms of timelines today. Brief pause. So I call this show Birth of a New Dimension, and the whole idea is that we are collectively and as a planet giving birth to a new level of reality. And this is true, let's call it flight through space and time and consciousness, that we literally don't have to build a clank metal spaceship in order to fly off the surface of our planet with all of our food ground up into toothpaste tubes and literally go somewhere else. It's a very limited viewpoint. It's very literalist. It's based in objective materialism, and it's not accurate. And so the best way that I can describe all of this is that humanity right now is in a sort of mental prison. And the imprisonment is due to levels of consciousness and what a person can perceive of and conceive of and even imagine. So for a very long time, the limits of the human imagination were, the idea of getting into a clank metal space saucer and then flying somewhere else, like through Earth's atmosphere. It has taken a lot of cultivation of the collective, social levels of awareness to get people to even understand the concept of timelines, that we are in a time field that is comprised of multiple different timelines or pathways of probability and possibility. And all of this starts to get into abstraction and logic and math. And a lot of people are intimidated by these thoughts. But I don't want you to be intimidated. I want this to be as easy for you to navigate through as it is to say, let's get a map and look at the road and know where we're driving with our physical car. Because it's been very difficult to even talk about time. It's such a slippery concept. It's not something that is easy to point to in the physical reality. Like we can point to a clock, but how do we understand time? How do we come up with a common language and a way of understanding the map or the structure of what time is structured like? And I think I've said this before, and for those of you who are returning longtime listeners, thank you. Thank you for bearing with me and going through the repetition of, I always try to make each broadcast like a little encapsulation of all of the major concepts. So thank you for being with me for so long and listening to all of this. And that's why I tend to repeat and get everything in case this is the only broadcast that someone listens to. So we are like fish that are swimming in a river, and fish are not necessarily aware of the watery medium that they swim within because it is so ever-present and ubiquitous in their life. And so too is it with our experience of time, that we are swimming within this river or ocean of time, and it is all around us and we're always experiencing it, and it is in the invisible medium through which we move. And so it can be very difficult to even notice it and to be able to talk about it effectively. So I draw these pictures and I make these diagrams, and I encourage everyone, free plug for me, check out flyingrainbowlasagne.com, where you can look at my paintings and you can also check out my animations. And I have an entire YouTube video series that is free to the public, and I also have a formalized set of recorded lessons that requires enrollment. And all of this is describing my perception of the time field. And I have to tell you, it's not just my own personal fantasy or thing that I made up. Like, that would actually be very flattering. People have come into my studio and they look around and they're like, wow, Aurora, you made all of this up? I'm like, no, that is way beyond me. The truth is, there's a great composer that I read the musical score. I see all of this music. I cannot take the credit unless I dilate my identity to being the great composer, because I really do feel that that is truthful, that each one of us is a fragment of the divine, that each one of us is like a shard of a larger mosaic, and so it is appropriate for us to claim our identity and say, yes, I'm that divine composer. In this body right now, I'm an individuated person, and I like to consider myself to be a jazz musician in this giant symphony. And I say jazz musician because, first of all, I'm very inspired by jazz music, and also the idea of innovation and being fully in the moment. So there's a real dichotomy between classical music, which is music that's been written by a composer maybe hundreds or many hundreds of years ago, and it has notations of exactly, how everything should sound. And then the musician and the performer and the conductor has very little leeway in what they express. And yet there's still wiggle room for expression. Like not every pianist plays the notes exactly the same way. There's different emotional intonations, and all of the different conductors of various different symphonies over many hundreds of years do different interpretations, where they might ask for one section to be louder or faster, or integrate the music differently. It's a different flavor. It's like saying there's lots of different places that make your favorite Italian food. Not everybody makes the pizza that tastes exactly the same way. So, and all of that is fine. Contrast that minor, differences in the various, pizza recipes of symphony musicians with jazz musicians. I love John Coltrane. I really think that person is a true genius in the term of being like an embodiment of divine creativity. So I listened to that music, and the same song, like the same basic song structure, can be performed and interpreted very differently at each time that it's played. So it's like the antithesis of classical music, where every time it's the same set of notes and harmonic structures. With jazz music, it's very much a question of, or a practice of, taking the basic beginning ingredients and then riffing and taking it into a new direction each time. And sometimes it builds upon what has already been established in the past, and sometimes it reaches forward into wild, unexpected, untamed, undomesticated new territories. So I consider myself like a jazz musician of consciousness, because that is what I do with the Flying Rainbow Lasagne genetic oscillation. It is innovation in the moment. It's spontaneous. It's responsive to the context. That's what a jazz musician does. Jazz musician doesn't play it the same way every night. They're responding to the other musicians around them. They're responding to, hey, maybe the weather is different. Maybe they're in a different environment. Like one night it's a giant concert hall, one night it's a small intimate club. Differences in the feelings of your emotion. All of that is to be honored. So I do the Flying Rainbow Lasagne dance. I literally call it a dance. It is a subcellular dance, or an oscillation, or a vibration. Oh, brief pause while I say my work. So it is a cellular dance that is done with the vibrating strings of my DNA, of my genetic code. And hey, I say this all the time, the only real estate that you really own, the only material items that you really own in this world right now, are the cells of your physical body. So yes, I'm a walk-in, or I'm a galactic abstraction. I'm what happens when you take abstract consciousness from a different scale and combine it with a human, multicellular, organic body, and then have experiences in the context of this time and place. That all adds up to and equals Aurora. So if you have a problem with the word walk-in, or if you have met other people who are negative walk-ins, because I'm kind of sensing that it's like, not everybody is like me. It's like if you say, oh, I'm from France, and people give you the stink eye. It's like, oh, I don't know who else you've met from France, but maybe they were a jerk or something. So yes, I'm not an intergalactic jerk. I am an intergalactic visitor, and I'm a person who is on their own individual journey. And I also am working with all of the other people that are here on their individual journeys in order to improve the overall music of the time field. So this gets into questions of ethics, interdimensional ethics. How much are you allowed to intervene? There are non-interventionists. I'm not one of them, clearly. I came down into this body. When I say down, I mean into this frequency level, not down like into a hellish, horrible place. But I know that this world can be perceived as a hellish, horrible place. It's interesting. Somebody asked me, a friend who I was in conversation on the phone, they said, hey, do you consider your journey to be a sacrifice? Your journey as Aurora, coming here into this physical body. And at first I answered in terms of the person who used to be in this body, that, yeah, they were a sacrificial victim. They were sacrificed to in this ritual and, as part of being targeted. And at first I interpreted it in that way. But then my friend clarified. He's like, no, do you feel that it was a sacrifice for you to come from like the levels of consciousness that you were in, or whatever experience you were having, into this density. Because he talked about near-death experiences, and it's true. There's a lot of people who have had near-death experiences, and they feel like it's a beautiful place, and they love it being there, and they don't want to have to come back into the troubles and toils of the body. And so, I mean, the truth is, so yeah, the process of coming into this body was full of turmoil and was very traumatic and was very painful, because it was all part of this interdimensional battle. So it was not a comfortable, peaceful birth at all. And I do remain connected to and still have conscious awareness of the beautiful, divine, harmonious, blissful place that I was in. That is where, like, I talk a lot about the barbarian value system of this place. It's not only that it is less comfortable to be here in the physical body. Like, our physical bodies can be perfectly healthy and harmonious. The social structure here is very distorted. So the thing that was the most difficult for me to adjust to is the idea that not everybody here is your friend. Not everybody here is to be trusted. You cannot take people's words literally. You have to examine and question the underlying motives of each thing that a person does. Like, you can't just put your purse down at a party. That is just an allegory or an analogy for being here. Like, you can't just be a completely loving and open person and just trust and hug everyone. Oh, no. If you do things like that, then you will really be vulnerable to all sorts of predation, to be preyed upon in all sorts of different ways. And it's just, these are the lessons that I learned in chronological adulthood that most other people have learned in early childhood. You know, eventually, like, maybe you're protected as a little tiny infant and child, but then eventually you have a negative experience. Like, you meet someone mean, and then you're like, wow, there's mean people out there. There's people that I don't like. Everyone has been nice up until this point, but now I met people who are mean. That has been very much, and then you learn, like, oh, let's not be with the mean people. Let's also learn to be able to perceive them from afar, so we don't have to deal with them. Yeah, so I was amazed and disappointed by the barbarian value system and the idea of people not simply helping one another because we are all cells of this much larger body. Like, to me, it is antithetical to the overarching goal of health of the time field and continued metabolism of our consciousness to not help other consciousnesses that are here. That just doesn't make sense in a very basic way. So I had to learn all about capitalism and competition and that whole value system, which I say is the barbarian value system. And it doesn't even make sense in terms of capitalism. Like, capitalism is the economic or financial representation of the idea of, you know, kill or be killed, and to the victor go the spoils, and the person with the biggest muscles gets to be in charge. So the idea is, if you run a shoe store and someone else opens up a shoe store on the same block as you, according to the capitalistic model, you are supposed to now be in dire competition with that other guy's shoe store. And you're supposed to now either have to advertise more or lower your prices or undercut them or, you know, sabotage them in some way. But that person is not your friend. And I look at it in a very different way. I'm like, wait, if you have two shoe stores on the same road, then what you can do is begin to call it the shoe district. And you can even invite other shoe stores to be a part of the shoe district, because I, as a shopper, am more likely to go looking for shoes in a place where there are more options, more stores clustered together, as opposed to having to drive to 5 different separate locations all around town. So that's just a little basic example of how the short-term gains of competitive capitalism lead to long-term losses. That because a store owner might be so short-sighted about how to protect their profits and their ability to earn, that they don't understand that there is a way to structure the capitalistic buying and selling marketplace in a way that many people benefit. It doesn't have to be one person benefits at everyone else's expense. It can actually be many people benefit. And so I'm coming from a very different perspective. So my collective of consciousness that I'm coming from, this place That's not a physical place. Like, I don't come from a physical star. I come from the star system, the entire integrated network of consciousness that is on the stars. And in order to travel on the stars, you have to be able to drop your baggage and travel light. Literally travel on light beams. So this is like taking a sun bath. And when you connect with the sun directly or connect with the stellar network directly in this way, it means that everything that is temporal falls away. Temporal is temporary. And temporary means connected to the temporal ego. So in order to travel on the stellar network and travel light, you have to drop, quote unquote, the baggage of your ego. And that's not to say we have to kill our ego. I'm not an advocate for that at all, because I consider the ego to be a very valuable interface between the individuated consciousness, like the abstract unarticulated consciousness, and the rest of the context. If you go to Europe, you got to plug in whatever are your electronic devices. You have to have the right shaped plug. You have to have the interface that allows you to connect with that electrical system. If you don't have the right plug, you can't get connected. Well, your ego is like the electrical plug that allows you to connect to the rest of thought structure known as human society. However, the ego is largely structured temporally, meaning according to this time and place, a sweater that has been custom knit to fit you in this time and place. But that sweater shape is totally irrelevant when you go to a different time and place. Hey, maybe here you live on the tundra and you need a big heavy sweater. Maybe the next place that you go to is a desert place where your tundra-shaped sweater is totally inappropriate. So all of this is about refining out the true eternal characteristics of who you are. And that's who or what you bring with you in terms of your sense of self and identity. And all of the other stuff that says, my name is Joe Smith, and this is my favorite sweater, and this is my dog, or this is my horse, and this is my home address, and this is where the defining characteristics of my life. In third grade, somebody pushed me on the playground, and then I felt sad. That these are, and I use these consistent examples all the time, because these are the parts of you that aren't eternal. They're just the temporary narrative structures. And mostly what they are the descriptors of the reason for emotional perturbations. Like somebody pushed you on the playground when you were in third grade, you never got over that, and then that became a part of your identity. It's like understanding the backstory of a villain in any comic book scenario. Like, blah blah was a perfectly fine scientist until one day his experiment went awry and then he turned into this super villain. So that is understanding that it's the temporal experience of, being exposed to some horrible accident that made this person go awry. It doesn't have anything to do with their core persona and characteristics that would transfer over many different contexts. So, for example, if I use myself, because I'm most familiar with myself, then I can use it as an example. The tendency to be creative. In this time and place, it is expressed as visual arts and visual, auditory music. If I were in the body of a rock shrimp, I would be expressing this as the bubbles that I blow with my little rock shrimp proboscis or whatever it's called. I would blow some super awesome, very well-formed, they make these little artistic bubbles that pop and emit little lights. If I were a puffer fish, I would make awesome little designs with my belly on the surface of the sand at the bottom of the ocean. I'm in a human body, so I have access to wonderful, colorful paints and art supplies. So I create these paintings, and I also have a piano. I'm sitting down here on the ground, so I can't get up. And I got my new furry overlord boss sitting next to me, so that's why I'm not just playing the piano right now. But I express my eternal characteristics through these temporal contexts. If I were born in a different time and place that didn't have pianos, I'd have a different instrument. If I were born, let's say, if I were embodied in a time when commercial paints did not exist, maybe I would use nothing but natural earth pigments, like indigo and ochre and red clay, and I would still make all of these inner expressions. Or let's say that we live in a completely different type of body that is a completely different type of sensory organism, different than having ears and eyes, maybe something that makes olfactory creative landscapes. So I would then be a symphony creator of olfactory landscapes. All of this in order to say that I know that the eternal characteristic within myself is the tendency to be creative, and that no matter what time and place and what resources are around me, that it would be expressed through those resources. So if I identified solely as a piano player, I said, I am a piano player across all timelines, it's like, then that means that you're only claiming a very small portion of yourself. So all of these life experiences, I say all the time that we are in a refinery of experience, a refinery of time. All of these life experiences are designed for each one of us, and in conjunction with the cosmos, to be able to determine what are our truthful, eternal characteristics. Who are you on the most core level? Because that is the person that will be endlessly traveling through time. The person who says, I'm Joe Smith, and here's my favorite sweater, and here's my dog and my horse. That person will not be traveling endlessly through time. So now we can segue a little bit into a conversation about afterlife. So when people get these special cameras, or if they have, experiences with ghosts or supernatural residues, what they're really experiencing are the leftover aspects of consciousness that are not able to travel on the stellar network. The stellar network is like this, imagine a laser pinpoint of light, and everything has to be coherent and focused down to that very refined level. And all of the other stuff, let's call it memories and emotional residue, and all of that needs to be resolved and let go of or digested in terms of the larger metabolism of the time body. So I've used this example before, forgive me for being so repetitive. My friend that lived in historic Kingston, New York, which was built in the 1600s, and he told me he lived in one of these old apartments of an old stone building. He once saw a supernatural residue, an image of a woman wearing kind of like a bonnet, Revolutionary War type garb. And she was picking up a tray or like a casserole from the table in the middle of the room and turning and walking to the side of the room and putting it on a slightly smaller, different table. And that is not, we do not define ourselves as I'm the person that lifted up that casserole dish and carried it across the room. That is not an eternal characteristic. That is definitely the definition of a temporal characteristic. And so it means that that person, who lived hundreds of years ago, has been on some kind of repeated time loop, doing that over and over without that aspect of themselves recognizing that they're actually dead. So being dead, this is another thing. It's like talking about time. It's so hard for people to understand what it is because there's no graphic understanding of it. So take a few moments if you can, check out my artwork, because all of these diagrams, and I do all these webinars, it's all about teaching people about timelines and the membrane of death and the way that energy and consciousness circulates throughout this map of time. And it shows death as a dynamic, waterfall of energy, that when your consciousness reaches that waterfall, it is unmade, like a sweater being unknit, or like a pill being digested, like a pill being dissolved in some kind of solvent or digestive juices. And that's supposed to be instantaneous. What's supposed to happen is you're not supposed to hit the membrane of death. We're supposed to have our higher faculties fully activated, be able to see through time, be able to grasp the steering wheel of time and choose which timelines we inhabit, and stay perfectly focused on that little coherent wormhole that is at the top of the structure, and never have to hit the membrane of death. It's like if you were bowling and none of your balls ever went in the gutter, they all just went straight down the alley and gave you a perfect score every time. That's what we would be like if we hadn't been genetically squashed. However, we've been genetically squashed. I'm sorry to report to you, and I use these lighthearted terms. Please don't dismiss me because I use them in this way. I do this in order to not have people freak out and think, wow, we're all destroyed and raped and now demons inhabit all of us and, to fly off the handle. Don't do that. However, horrible things have happened in our past, and I don't mean to sound flippant about this. Horrible things have happened in Earth's past that have created this present genetic and social structure that is quite limiting. And so when I say we're in this prison, the prison is genetic and the prison is consciousness-based, and the society and the culture uphold both of those tendencies. So the flying rainbow lasagna is a genetic oscillation that allows you to transcend both of those tendencies, both biological and social slash cultural. And that's it's like the key to get out of here. So flying rainbow lasagna, what a wonderfully light-hearted term for something that literally means the key to get out of the genetic prison that everybody has been in since humanity and the planet was horribly raped over 10,000 years ago. And I express the flying rainbow lasagna through drawings and paintings, like two-dimensional artwork, but all of that is like a reflection of the three-dimensional sculptural form, and it's not a static form, it's a dynamic form. It's the end result of an oscillation of energy moving through time. So I've also created some animations, and I'm coming up with some new ones that will express even more accurately how this energy is formed. So just like if you have a tornado or a water spout is created by nothing more than formed by nothing more than the force, rather, of water or air swirling amidst itself. It's because of the structure of the motion of energy. So the motion that is happening is a motion through time. And the time motion affects the structure of your DNA and the dance of your DNA. And you can move through time in a different way by structuring your DNA in a different way, just like make a tornado in your DNA. And that tornado is called the flying rainbow lasagna. It is a dynamic, whirling structure that has a tempo. It has like a beat. Like I'm going to clap my hands. It has a beat that you go on, and you must integrate with all of the other musicians that are part of the symphony of life. And those other musicians include the microbiome, all of the microbes that help you to digest your food and live in your tummy. There's over 3 trillion of them that just in order for you to be alive and eat food. You've got all the microbes that live on the outer surface of your skin. You've got all of the plants and animals that you integrate with and live on the planet with you, and that some of which you eat. There is the planet itself or herself. There's the solar system itself. There's the galaxy itself. This is integrating on a grand scale. There's music and life on a grand scale. I can't even I'm laughing in advance of this thought. The idea that some humans on this planet actually think that the only life that exists is on this planet, like the only biological life or the only consciousness life. It's beyond laughable. Like I can't even drop my monocle or drop my opera glasses enough in response to that. Consciousness is everywhere. And first of all, it's across many different timelines, and it's also on varying different scales. So there's consciousness at the level of a micro crystal, like a crystal that might be made up of 2 or 3 atoms. There's consciousness at the level of an atom or a Bose-Einstein condensate. There's consciousness on the supragalactic scale, and that is what I'm much more familiar with in terms of all of these different stars being a individual neuron or point of consciousness that all gathers together in a larger embroidery. That is what is the stellar network, and that is what we can travel on as an alternative to a clank-clank metal vehicle. So in some ways, it might be easier to just travel in a clank-clank metal vehicle. Dig a bunch of ore, smelt it, roll it out into different sheets of different, strengths, and hammer it all together. And then, like I said, make a metal suit for yourself, gather all of your oxygen into canisters, gather all of your food into toothpaste tubes, put on a space diaper. Seriously, astronauts wear a space diaper in order to piss and poop into, and then blast off using a lot of, solid fuel or liquid rocket fuel as your fuel, and get out of the gravity well and fly through the vast interstellar reaches of space in order to find another rock where you can possibly set up some kind of encampment and try to live there and try to maybe terraform it to make it habitable for people of your own species. Maybe that's actually easier than going through this other process, which is the question or the challenge of understanding time in a completely different way, perceiving reality in a completely different way, cultivating the cellular structure of your body into a new cellular structure, and teaching your DNA or encouraging your DNA to dance into a new shape, and doing this in partnership and conjunction with all of the other life forms that are around you. Like maybe it's actually easier to just build a metal spaceship, and I think that's why those species do it, because they're not actually virtuosos. They can't actually play the music. They can't actually make their fingers move that fast on the piano in order to actually express themselves in the symphony of life. So they're like, okay then, if we can't really sing, we'll just auto-tune our voices. We'll just use technology to do what we need to do. Because really the whole way that the cosmos was structured was that if you need a clank metal spaceship to get off the surface of your planet, you ain't ready yet. You're supposed to have to first go through all of those levels of self-cultivation and then get to the point where you can get off the surface of your planet just using consciousness. And what would a journey like that even look like? If you got off the surface of your planet without using consciousness, what would that even look like? Would it look like flying somewhere else? Would it look like, oh, all of a sudden everybody took off their clothes and started to levitate? You know, it's kind of biblical literalism with the idea of a rapture. I put forth to you the concept that it would not even look like going to a different place. However, the landscape around you and the context around you would profoundly transform. That it's the type of journey that one takes, you know, they have those kids set, like the kids version, and then there's the adult grown-up version. Like a little tiny Tonka toy is a tiny little kid's truck. Then there's the real giant dump truck. Well, the Tonka toy is having a psychedelic adventure. And the real earth-moving equipment is going on a journey of pure consciousness without using a clank metal spaceship. So the Tonka toy adventure of using some kind of entheogen, like some kind of molecular hallucinogen, to unlock these doors, it gives humans the idea that your mind is a powerful tool for traveling places. However, the idea is that we become self-propelled, not having, like, you know, it's the same thing. If you have to grind up all your food into toothpaste tubes, then it's like, what are you going to do if you run out of your toothpaste tubes? What are you going to eat? The whole idea is that there is this perfect system that's been created where the light that we travel upon is our food. So I've spoken about this a lot. I came from, and still am, a place where we eat light. I came from a place where we eat light, and here in this body I eat light too. And I also eat physical food. So I just had a nice apple with some almond butter on top of it. I don't eat just nothing but pure light, but boy, wouldn't my life be more simple if I could. And you can ask that question, Aurora, why don't you? The answer is because in the time and place when we ate nothing but pure light, we structured our society differently, and we also had access to light in a different way, and our environment fed us. So it's not just the question of, like, if you eat food, you don't just eat random food. You don't just eat like the grass that is growing in your lawn. That is not nutritive. You grow specific foods just to nourish your body. Well, just rearranging my chair here. If you eat nothing but pure light, you first of all have to be nomadic. That means that you have to be able to go where there is light. You're not going to live in the cold, frozen Northland where there's no light for 6 months out of the year. It's like being a photosynthetic plant. You have to be where there's enough light for you, and you have to get enough light every day in order to grow properly. Like, this is what plants have to do. You also have to have an effective light source. So our beautiful sun in the sky, our nearest star, is an effective light source. However, there is right now intentional thick layers of atmospheric pollution, and that is totally not acceptable. Those thick layers of atmospheric pollution, I'm referring to nanoparticles that are intentionally sprayed in our sky that are literally part of a plot, an attack against humanity. Our planet is under attack right now. Our planet and the biosphere and the free expression of your own consciousness is under attack. That there are all of these intentional atmospheric pollutants that diminish our own individual connection to the sun and the stars and the stellar network. So yes, there are thick layers of clouds, and there are nanoparticles that make it so that we don't get uninterrupted access to the sun. And there's even some question as to whether there's an imposter sun in front of our own sun, or augmenting our own sun, or somehow a layer of distortion technology, like projection, like a movie projector that is projecting a false image of an artificial sun where should be our regular natural sun. All of these things make it more difficult to be a light eater, and in the time before the fall of consciousness, before our genes were horribly squashed, we had wonderful, the word that I'm looking for is infrastructure. Our infrastructure helped to maintain and amplify energy. So some of it was like having crystals around us. Instead of having furniture, we had very large pieces of, rose quartz or amethyst. And that's part, like, you don't just be a light eater without having a giant piece of rose quartz that you can sit on, like the size of a refrigerator. If you're a food eater, your refrigerator is your essential equipment in your house. And if you're a light eater, the sun and having a giant, sized crystal that you can sit on is essential equipment for your house. So these are some of the answers so that you can understand why at this moment I'm not fully a light eater. Boy, wouldn't my grocery bills be so much easier. However, what I would need to do is invest in a giant crystal, the capacity to only be where there is light all the time. And then, yes, it's a very different state of consciousness that one is much less likely to engage in all of the normal social behaviors that are part of this current time and place. Like if you don't eat food and you don't go out to restaurants and you don't go to grocery stores, like you are not really participating on that level. So a lot of this has been about my own education and solidarity in being here. I'm not just sitting on a higher interdimensional cloud. I'm not just in a state of abstraction and comfort and saying, oh, the poor humans, something will trickle down to them and will help them out. I'm actually here on the front lines with everyone else, having to eat food and having to get that food. And I understand in this time and place that means having to have money and buy it at a grocery store, even though, sometimes I barter at a farmer's market or get something that someone has homegrown. But it's the question of where do you get resources from? Where do you get food from? So yes, we are in transition right now to becoming pure light eaters. But we're not completely there yet. So this has also been a journey of self-acceptance for me. When I first came in, I thought, just going to be like lickety-split. We're all going to be light eaters. And it's been 16 years at this point. So I've had to learn to be super patient and very understanding and very accommodating. And back to this whole question of whether it's a sacrifice for me to be here. It's definitely less comfortable to be on the ground, on the front lines, and we are endlessly attacked. We're attacked by physical pollution, we're attacked by electromagnetic fields, and also targeted energy weapons that attempt to harm the biology and harm your thoughts. Your thoughts and your mental sovereignty matter the most because that is part of the steering wheel that guides you through time. It's truly important. This is a battle for being able to think with your own mind so that you can go in the direction that you want to go. Because where we go, the way that we go, and all of this journey of true star travel is traveling through time. So the truth is your body is your vehicle for star travel. And your body does not act without context. It acts within the context of many other biological, either embodied or non-embodied consciousnesses that add up to the metabolism known as the time field. So it's not just something that you do on your own. Just like playing a symphony is not just something that you do on your own. You can play a beautiful solo violin performance. That's not the same as a symphony. It's not the same as when you have many violins and also pianos, and also kettle drums and tubas, and piccolos in the high-pitched range. We have all of these things working together. That's when you really have the symphony. So the real answer is I'm here because I want to be part of the symphony. And I remember making a very clear choice after I created the Flying Rainbow Lasagna, in the journey of walking in or interdimensionally traveling into this physical body. I really had an option where I could have just transcended the experience of being in the physical. Like I could have just been like, nope, gonna bypass that and go directly, skip all of those, steps on the journey and just go directly to the last chapter. And because once you have a thought, once you think something, it is available for everyone. It's not like it's only available to you. So once I had the conception of the idea of the Flying Rainbow Lasagna and I applied it to my own experience, it was available for anyone to be able to use. Well, it actually wasn't enough for me on an ego level to just think the first, the flying rainbow lasagna for the first time, think of it for the first time, and then just be like, okay, the seed has been planted, but another gardener will tend to this plant, and another gardener will come along and harvest the fruit and actually experience it. I really felt motivated to come into the body and have this full experience because I wanted to tend the garden. I'm like, I made that seed, I thought that thought, and now I want to see what happens as a result of it. So, of course, I was often very disappointed on my journey being here in the body. I thought that things would be lickety-split. I thought that things would go much faster. I thought that they would go much smoother. Oh my goodness, like the whole time. There have been many times where I'm like, okay, like I thought this would be done last year and it's still dragging onward. So at a certain point, I'm like, look, I'm here for the long haul. It's going to be like this. I better get prepared, get comfortable. So yeah, after a certain point, I was like, mentally, I was like, okay, I'm going to be here for a little while. It's going to take time because I understood that what was most important was helping or preparing other people for these other perceptions and conceptions about flying through time, because we all fly together. So that is, I have a particular painting that is called Vessel, and it's many different Merkabahs or individual light body vessels that are working together. I really don't care if someone else has co-opted and hijacked the word Merkabah at this point. It is so frustrating to me. It's like I've been playing in the key of C for a very long time, and all of a sudden people will come along and they'll say, hey, someone else is playing in the key of C and it's evil, stop doing it. I'm like, this is just ridiculous. I can't even stay ahead of it. So yes, I call this star tetrahedron shaped counter-rotating fields of energy that surround and interpenetrate our body on a particular level of envisionment and willpower, the Merkabah, and it is a tool that I use in order to protect my body and travel through time, space, and consciousness. And it is an effective tool. I do not feel it's effective to say, oh, that someone else hijacked the note of C, so we should all no longer play in the note C. Like, that is utterly ridiculous. The note C is a perfectly good note. Don't just throw it out because you don't like what someone else is doing with it. So yeah, and the idea is that you don't have to make the journey on your own. I say this all the time. We're on a soul migration, like little baby sea turtles. The babies all hatch at the same time out of a giant cluster of eggs on the ocean, on the sandy part. And then they have to crawl out. Oh, it's really hard to crawl out. Hey, it's really hard for them to even get out of their little nest. And then while they're trying to crawl across the beach to get to the ocean, lots of predators come along and some of them get eaten or picked off, or some of the little babies never make it, or they crawl in the wrong direction. They don't know where they're going. So the best thing we can do is to encourage one another in the journey. Like, hey, I'm a baby sea turtle. You are too. Let's climb out of this little egg. Let's get out of this layer of reality and get into an expanded layer of reality. Let's make it to the ocean of cosmic consciousness and then swim around and have wonderful adventures. And in order to do so, we got to avoid these predators. There are a lot of social programs and religious programs that I would call are like consciousness predators, the things that would like to harvest you in your trajectory. Like a little baby sea turtle is heading towards the ocean. If it makes it to the ocean, it's going to grow up into a nice, big, strong entity and be, formidable and intimidating. And if you pick it off when it's a little tiny, crunchy baby, then you got it. And you got it while it was young and vulnerable. And this is the whole refinery of consciousness, to see which selections of characteristics successfully make it to the ocean of consciousness to live eternally, like to continue their journey through time. Not all aspects of consciousness are worthy of coming along. This is not to be judgmental or blameful or finger pointing or in any way to say that something is, worthy of being guillotined or anything like that. It's like saying some songs are really good songs and they are eternal songs and we should keep them in our repertoire and sing them all the time. And some songs are horrible, disharmonious, their lyrics are not compelling, and they're not worth keeping. And those personality aspects that are like not good music, they're mostly the things that are based on the distortions of the temporal ego. And so the analogy that I used with the woman with the casserole dish, that was a relatively non-emotional residue. A lot of that's just boredom. That person probably did that for their whole life. Probably some, old lady from the colonial times that made 1 million casseroles and cleaned the dishes every night. Like, that is just an automaton. That's just the residue of an automatic life. But there's other residues that come more from traumatic experiences, like having experienced violence or some horrible injury or a rape or some kind of abuse, that those aspects of consciousness tend to hang around and need to be resolved. And to me, that is my understanding of resting in peace. The idea that any perturbations, emotional perturbations that might have happened during life would be resolved so that they're not kicking around like an angry ghost on the interstices, that consciousness should dissolve instantaneously when it hits that membrane of death, and it should all go into a state of entropy. Entropy is the opposite of energy in terms of science language. So entropy represents the total loss of energy, like something becoming completely cold and completely dark and completely motionless. And this is what is supposed to happen to any aspects of self that hit the membrane of death. They're not supposed to keep going on and living. This is the challenge of the teaching of religious teachings about afterlife, that they have programmed humanity with the expectation that after you die, you should have an afterlife. Afterlife does exist. I don't want anybody to think that when you die, you just cease to exist. Like, that's the objective materialist viewpoint. And I think if you embody that viewpoint, you'll get what you expect. Really, in terms of afterlife, it is the definition of you get what you expect. So the ancient Egyptians of pharaonic Egypt taught that during your life you were building a bark or a raft made out of your belief system and your religion and what you put your energy into and what you espouse, and that upon the physical death of your body, that's like putting your raft into the river and seeing if it sails. And if you structured your belief system well, and if you put your energy into the right things, it's like having strong wooden planks that are put together well, and your boat stays together. And if you have crappy planks, crappy idea systems, if you have things that are not fit together well, then that is not going to be a ship that can carry your consciousness across eternal waters. Well, objective materialists use as the planks of their ship, of their raft, the basic ideas that afterlife doesn't exist. And if you use that wood will disintegrate as soon as it gets into the river of consciousness. It's like, oh, afterlife doesn't exist, therefore I will no longer exist after this. But that is so our journey of consciousness does carry onward. It is eternal. However, we identify with the eternal aspects of self in order to continue moving forward through time, as opposed to hanging on to the baggage of the temporal ego, the baggage of your definition of self. Some people are super associated with their family and their heritage. It's all about their family name, their other biological family members, and what they have been as a part of that family. And that if they're not in that family, who would they be? Who would you even be if you weren't part of that family? And that is when you move onward in terms of consciousness, you have to relinquish that identity. You're not a Smith anymore, or a Williams anymore, or a Jones anymore. You're just your bare naked consciousness traveling on this network of consciousness. And it doesn't mean that you are a pablum, unflavored, I want to say vanilla, like boring, identityless creature. It does not mean that at all, because I began this broadcast by saying that I know my eternal identity is one of a very creative being. I create art and music through the physical human body, and if I were a rock shrimp, I'd be creative with bubbles, right? Or if I were a dolphin, I'd blow torus-shaped bubbles, or a beluga whale, or something like that. The idea is that those characteristics continue onward in our journey, and the parts that it's like, oh yeah, this is my favorite pants, or this is my home address, that part does not continue onward, because those pants and that home address, that is only relevant to the person that you are right now, and that we need to be fluid in our identity to be able to encompass a larger scale. Like, you're not just this person within this one epidermis. You are also interconnected with a much larger network of consciousnesses. And so part of traveling by using this vessel of consciousness and light and coherent light and awareness is connecting to other organisms and being respectful of them and their journey. So when I do the Flying Rainbow Lasagna dance, yes, it's a real dance too. I sit in a special chair outside. Even if I didn't have my chair, I usually sit on the ground, and at first I ingest sunlight. I do sun gazing. That does not mean that I stare at the sun directly with my physical retinas. What I do is I use a hat to block out the physical sun, so that it doesn't burn out my eyes, and I connect with my inner eye to the sun as the nearest broadcaster of the rays of the stellar network. It's like the nearest quote-unquote cell phone tower, giving me the broadcasts from the galactic central sun. And of course, that central core of our galaxy is connected to a much larger meta or overarching consciousness. So we understand that we're like fractal outgrowths of a finer and finer and finer central aspect. And that's real unity consciousness. Whenever I mention unity consciousness, a lot of people bring up the law of one and teachings about Ra, R-A, this God, and I'm really not into any of that. I've never read the law of one, and I have actually heard some analysis that says that it is a highly tainted and distorted channeling. So I cannot advocate for the law of one, even if I use words that are in that writing. Like if I call something the source of consciousness, it doesn't mean that I endorse the law of one. And if I talk about unity consciousness, it doesn't mean that I endorse the law of one. I think that there's some serious questions to be skeptical about that in terms of the idea of setting humanity up for the expectation of a harvesting agenda. That, to me, that is the religious socio-cultural program. That is the long con. The idea that one must die in order to reach eternal life, quote unquote heaven. And that I really feel that if you are programmed while you are in your biological body to believe, heaven is a place in a cloud where angels wear long white gowns and strum on golden harps, like the typical biblical literalist description of heaven. That's like plank in your raft. And when you set sail upon your death, you will say, I expect to see this beautiful cloudy place. Well, in more recent times, people have had programming from returnees of near-death experience. They say, a tunnel, I saw a bright light, I saw a tunnel, and my old grandma was there, and she gestured me into the light. Like, whatever is your mythology of what you expect, that is what you will experience. So a lot of this has to do with setting up in life the correct expectation for what to experience in death. But I'm telling you, with Flying Rainbow Lasagna, you can abrogate the necessity of death. You don't have to drop or get rid of your physical body. I know so many people find their physical body burdensome. It's not. It's not burdensome. It's beautiful. Our physical bodies can also be transformed, just like a caterpillar into a butterfly. And that's what the true metamorphosis or transformation that we're experiencing right now is all about. We are transforming from beings that are like fish swimming in the river of time to imagine a bird that is flying up above the river, and you can see all of the fish, and you can see the river, and you can see where its origin is and where its destination is, and all of the rocks that it flows over, and you can even see the river of time where it used to flow 100 years ago. Like maybe it used to flow around a different rock or have a different riverbed, and you can even see how it's going to change and flow in 100 or 1,000 years. That is our new multidimensional perspective, and that is achieved from this Flying Rainbow Lasagna genetic dance oscillation, and also it is achieved from this combination of spirit and matter that is the birth of the new dimension. None of this is a fantasy. None of this is a mere hippy-dippy, ideal, utopian thing that I'm talking about that's an abstract. All of this is really experienced in the moment. So what a lot of people, I think, are feeling and defining as quote-unquote the Mandela effect, that I would define that as your mind is affecting reality, and reality is indeed malleable. That's one of the primary planks on your vessel of your raft, of your belief system. Reality is malleable according to consciousness. Hey, that runs antithetical to objective materialism that says reality is not malleable according to applying your consciousness. But how about quantum theory? It says reality is affected by applying observership. So objective materialists are not prepared. They don't have the wingspan or the feet, the flippers to swim. They don't know how to navigate these waters because a lot of it has to do with understanding consciousness. I say this all the time. Right now, Earth's surface human science consciousness. Science people, they do not want to recognize consciousness. They want to do experiments that are about particles. They want to do experiments that are about chemical reactions. They want to do experiments with things that they can easily measure and quantify with their current equipment, but they don't yet have equipment that can measure and quantify consciousness. So now let's rewind back a couple hundred years. Before the invention of lenses that were good enough to be used for microscopes, no one believed in the microbiome because science had not yet created an effective apparatus to be able to look at it. They could only look at things with their naked eyes. They didn't believe in microscopic organisms. As soon as the microscope was invented, science believed in microscopic organisms. When somebody finally invents, let's call it the consciousness scope, so you can see consciousness, then science will finally say, oh, well, look, there's this thing that's been here all along, that's been affecting our lives all along, and we just couldn't freaking see it. And so we didn't recognize how it was affecting our lives. Just like in the Dark Ages, they didn't understand that microbes made you sick. They thought that it was superstition. A witch made you sick, or maybe, I don't know, a Jewish person, or someone looked at you wrong, or a black cat crossed your path. None of those things make you sick. Microbes in the microbiome make you sick. So by understanding and being able to perceive and measure consciousness, science will eventually be able to better navigate this world. But up until that point, you, as an experiencer of consciousness, are way more sophisticated than any science, than any scientist, than any scientific apparatus, because your consciousness affects the apparatus. Your consciousness affects the camera. Your consciousness affects the scale. It affects the microphone. It affects the digital camera and the pixels. Your consciousness affects the world. So this is the birth of the new dimension. Matter and energy or pure consciousness are seamlessly integrated. And once you recognize that, if you make that a plank on your boat, you will very effectively be able to sail down the river of time eternally, because we don't exit this world by getting into a spaceship and flying somewhere else. We exit this world or the limitations of this level of reality by transforming reality around us with our minds. And we begin with our bodies. Just if you have any kind of malady or limitation or whatever is your inner problem, you can begin by healing your body and bringing your instrument into tune. And then we heal the social structure, and then we heal the planet, and then we jump off the surface of our planet. So thank you so much for being with me on this journey.
Truth on the Tracks you can catch every Monday night and Friday